why was this movie an important and moving movie for you?
Anthony Bourdain was one of my. I mean, I have him up here on my wall. Well, this movie meant a lot because of the person it's obviously about. So Anthony Bourdain, one of the biggest things about him that set him apart from the other people, like Gordon Ramsay's cool, Marco Pierre White is pretty cool. Thomas Keller, the owner of the French Laundry, like they all have their things, but they always seemed like they were like up here, you know. And when I first got into cooking, when I became a dishwasher and moved my way into becoming a line cook, I had always seen these badasses on the line and was like, I want to do that. And I always felt like, one of the riffraff, like, one of the outcasts. And I don't get that sense from, Marco Pierre White and from Gordon Ramsay, which it may be, but you can't tell by, the types of food they have, the kind of restaurants they have. But he was just like a grizzled pirate line cook. He reminded me of somebody that I would have on my cook line. And so it was, seeing him do his thing, and his kind of approach to life was always something that I found awesome.
Yeah, and I mean, Bourdain the chef is really actually he reminds me of Chef the line cook. Like I mean, it's kind of funny to me um how the life that I've seen you go through, progressing in your profession. It the video that they show of Anthony Bourdain, especially at the beginning of this documentary, reminds me a lot of the person that I saw in you, as you were getting into your career and really starting going on it. I think that's kind of why I've always sort of correlated the two of you together, because he is different as far as those celebrity chefs go. Gordon Ramsay, he yells and screams at Americans. He doesn't do any of that stuff in his English productions. He's
Yeah,
very nice to people in
like
England, because Americans want to see screaming British people. But I mean, but as far as all of them go, there was an accessibility to him. And I think they tried to. I think in a lot of ways they wanted to kind of recapture that with people like Guy Fieri and things like that, but Anthony Bourdain still maintained the class of being a chef. The best way that I can really think to put it is that Anthony Bourdain, to me, is like the Andre Agassi of celebrity chefs. He was in a classy sport, and he was just the bad boy in it. I think that brought a realism to his work, and it didn't take him out of what he was there to do.
he had such a crazy like start to his career, and like one of the things he said that was similar to what I said was like I became a dishwasher and working in the back of house because I didn't want to be around people.
Hmm.
Like that's what servers are for. Like they do that, and I'll just cook the food, and it'll be good. I mean, his journey through, I mean, even suffering through addiction and all that, and like getting clean. Like there's a one of the things that his one of his friends told him was like, I've never seen anybody for algorithm's sake. We'll just say quit hard drugs in general, not specify which one it is, but quitting it cold turkey. Whereas other
Hmm.
people they had to go to clinics and they had like lengthy rehab, and he was just like, man, I'm done with this.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, it is kind of uh it is kind of unheard of, especially, like, I mean, he did all of that stuff before he was famous.
Right.
So I think that probably made a lot of it much easier. Because anytime you see that with celebrities now with addiction, I mean, they are doing long stints in rehab facilities and returning to rehab facilities, until it sticks, and then they really struggle with it through their celebrity life.
Well, yeah, the only other person that I could think of that ever had that kind of a journey was Robert Downey Jr.
hmm
Like, because I remember they lampooned the crap. They even talked about it on The Simpsons. They had a bit where he was in a shootout with police, and I wonder what movie they're filming, and I don't see any cameras, and he's shooting at police, and he was kind of just seen as this, like, yeah, he's going to be a drug addict and a criminal. Like, who cares about this guy,
hmm
But then he gets Iron Man and just kills the role, you know.
hmm
And I think it was similar for Anthony Bourdain, where he was a line cook, and I think part of it he felt like he didn't really deserve it.
hmm
He wrote this book, and he started finding out that it was going on bestseller lists, and he's like shocked because he thought it was going to be a coffee table book. He didn't think anybody was going to. It would. He was like, his idea was going to write this book for other insiders, and it would be a book that, like, maybe a dishwasher would read somewhere and be like, "Yeah, that's what fish on Mondays." And
And that is not the case. Like the examples that they were giving of his writing, I am a writer, and and listening to the things that he wrote, just the little bits and pieces, like emails that he was sending his publisher's husband.
mm,
They were just emails, and they were brilliant writing. Like, I mean, I was moved by a fucking email,
right,
just the introspection, the introspective nature of the stuff that he was sending was just, it was astounding that somebody could do that. Just because they took a little walk in Tokyo, like,
yeah, and
it's crazy to me.
that is one of the things that I noticed too, because one of the things that kind of bothered him was this whole aspect of basically how, like, media will usually highlight the negative sides of a place.
hmm
They're really quick to go into a place and show all the poverty and the war and the destruction. But one of the first things that really got me through, because I didn't read Kitchen Confidential right away. I knew who Anthony Bourdain was, and I was kind of like, oh, he's the bad boy. There was some things that I knew about him up until I read Kitchen Confidential and then later saw the movie. But he had this way of, like, something that I believed in and was able to connect that way, was how food can bring not just two people, but can bring cultures together. Like, I don't have to know how to speak a language and connect to somebody with their food and the culture behind that food, you know.
hmm
And he was really, you could tell he was really trying to capture that in his show.
I don't know if you remember when they like moved over to CNN, they had interviews with all kinds of people from, I mean, I don't even remember all the people, Anderson Cooper, Christiane Amanpour, and all those people. They were like, what is the focus of your work? Is it the food? Is it the travel? Is it the the political aspect? I don't think he cared. I don't think it had anything to do with any of that stuff. I mean, but the one thing that every culture has in common is that everybody eats. I think for him that was a good excuse to meet people, was to sit at a table with them.
I've rarely, so in writing, just in writing in general, there's concepts like character arcs,
hmm
and rarely do you see this kind of character arc actually in real life, where somebody has, like, a true growth and they become like a hero. It happens, but it doesn't happen that often. A lot of people are usually supporting characters. They have the personality, they develop their personality, and that's just kind of who they are until they retire and one day they kick the bucket or whatever. But, like, with him, like, he started out self-described low life, and ended up, like, on this journey of self-discovery, and it just happened to also have been filmed at the same time.
Right.
And I think what they did with the movie was really incredible too, because I didn't know what to expect when I saw the movie, but them having Anthony Bourdain narrate it, not 100%, but you know what I mean. I thought that was incredible how they pieced that whole thing together. And then in addition to that, where in his book Kitchen Confidential, if you actually read the audio, or read the audio book, it's him in his own words. And that line at the beginning of the movie where he said, I'm paraphrasing, but basically this doesn't have a happy ending. That's in the book, and it was just crazy hearing like how they seeing the amount of effort that they put into piecing this story together to show from like beginning to end.
Right. And I also remember somewhere in there somebody was talking about right at the end of everything, they kind of noticed that none of this had anything to do with the food. Whoever it was that was being interviewed, I wish I could remember who it was. He said, after watching so many hours of footage and reviewing the life as it was lived, but it never was about the food. That it was always about him growing as a person. And I can kind of see that. I mean, I don't know that it really changed him anything like that. Going and being with people in the places where they're at is always going to change somebody. You're never going to come away with that. Unless you have no capacity to care for other people, you're not going to come away from those kind of experiences without being influenced.
But, yeah, I mean, and if you can't be influenced by everything that he went through, probably a psychopath.
Right.
Like especially him going to Lebanon. Was it Lebanon? He went some overseas, somewhere in 2006. There was like this uprising that started, and they were trying to film. He had a hard time. He had like an existential crisis where he was talking about like they're in this like resort, sipping margaritas, soaking in the sun, and there's attack helicopters flying overhead, heading towards this place for this, for this battle, and that came through in the movie, and I wasn't expecting that at all. Like I didn't know that ever happened. There were other things, but that was one of the big ones that I think was one of the things that kind of changed his perspective on like what he's doing.
Well, yeah, because playing around a pool and suntanning while helicopters are flying, firing rockets, within sight, and all of that stuff. I mean, there were kids there that had floaties on their arms saying they knocked down our house. When that little girl said it, she looked like she was having a great time, just playing in the pool. Yeah, they knocked down our house. Like it was just another Tuesday. It's impossible to see something like that and not somehow be moved by it. I don't think that it actually changed Anthony Bourdain. I think that a lot of that stuff was already there. I think that what it did was it just made him realize just how little it's acknowledged within anybody. Yeah. Because he was that snarky badass traveling chef, that had, some kind of witticism for everything, and kind of could be kind of sharp-witted sometimes, and then right there in front of him, poor people being bombed by rich people. So yeah, at the very beginning of the traveling Bourdain is him and the two people that he went with, they were really kind of unimpressed because he was
like awkward,
because he was such a recluse. He was very shy. He stayed to himself, and especially in Japan, where, I mean, the Japanese, what makes the Japanese so great, and why they have such why they're so revered is because they do everything to perfection. And so like something like that is very formal for the Japanese, and so it's kind of stuffy. And so I mean, it kind of clammed him up a little bit, and they were scared because they were like, this guy that writes like a, that writes like a rock star is just, he's so quiet and shy and everything. And I mean, I can totally edit it out if you don't want me to, but I mean, you were a very shy person, and I mean, you still kind of are, but but it's almost like like something about what he did opened him up to becoming himself for everyone.
Part of my what do you call it? I don't want to call it a mission statement, but my channel banner, it says, leadership, integrity, no BS, and that's part of the no BS. Like, I'm not some superstar, I'm just some guy, and I'm an awkward guy, I'm a quiet guy. Like, not as much anymore, but it took a lot of that coming out of your shell and learning, like, oh, not everybody hates you automatically, and
Right.
I can only imagine being Anthony Bourdain, this tall, lanky, white dude in Japan, sitting down doing these routines that he's not routines, but like customs that he's never done before. With a camera crew that he's never had a camera crew, and just like, what do you want from me? And they were like, well, do the stuff that you do from the book, but do it like now. He's like, that's not how it works.
I like the way that, like, in one of the videos that they shot in Japan, like, he was just sitting there in that room with one of the women coming in with more food, and he sits there and he takes a bite and he's just like, oh wow, this is amazing. And like, if you took that and put it next to any other video, like side by side, of Anthony Bourdain doing his thing, then you would think that it was two completely different people. Like, I mean, he was so reserved in all of that it's like, I wonder if he was afraid that they had like samurai standing behind the door, like waiting to chop his head off if he said that the food was bad.
Like if he did something.
Very stuffy. Yeah. Some people like to say that a lot of these celebrity chefs are very skilled, and that a lot of them are, that they have great ideas, or that they have a lot of experience and knowledge or whatever. But as far as celebrity chefs go, the product with him is him. Anthony Bourdain was the product. Everything he did was just marketing.
Yeah.
And
well, like, if you think about it, like, I guess there was a personality that was portrayed in the movie and in his shows and stuff. But when you think of Anthony Bourdain, there's a side of him that is kind of out in the public, and it's just raw, and him and his emotions and his thoughts and his feelings. But you have to dig, like with Gordon Ramsay, you have to dig to find that. He plays Gordon Ramsay, the angry chef. He's not like that. Every single person that there's people that I've met that have worked with him, that have talked to him, whenever he does interviews, or people giving like behind the scenes things on like Hell's Kitchen, they always say how nice of a guy he is.
mm-hmm.
It's only when the cameras are rolling and he's got to produce content that all of a sudden, you're an idiot sandwich or whatever. That was a skit, but it's just, but you don't have that type of, you don't get that with Anthony Bourdain. It's like,
no.
That's what it is. You can see him on the line. He's going to be pissed off because he's on the line, but he's not doing it for the cameras. He's doing it because he has like actual passion for what he does,
Right. And I think that's, I mean, and again, like somebody had said in the movie, though, I think that even then, that a lot of that was just kind of, like, I think the food was kind of the back seat, and it reminds me of one of the things that was said. It was important enough that I wrote it down. It as kind of a familiar quote sort of thing. But to Anthony Bourdain, the greatest sin is mediocrity. And and it reminds me of a quote that my dad used to say when I was a kid, and that was never accept mediocrity as a standard of excellence. I think that because of that standard of excellence, I think that's where a lot of his passion came out. Was, it didn't really even have anything to do with how the food tasted as much as, how it was prepared. And it didn't have as much to do about being prepared as much as, how it was being stored. And it didn't have as much to do about how it was being stored as much as it did where it was coming from.
Yeah,
And it like everything before it was more important, which meant that every level of producing food for somebody to eat had its own. There was something that he expected from every level of that.
right.
And and I think that was a reflection of himself.
Yeah, if I could put a word on it, that whole process and all of that stuff, the word that comes to mind is reverence.
Hmm.
Having reverence for the food, for the processes, the procedures, and like honoring and respecting those because of the putting emotions onto a plate. Because I've always said that the cooking a lot of times, because if you think about it, like anybody can make a baked potato, a hamburger, or whatever. Like most people can cook a lot of things at home.
Hmm.
Like maybe they can't make it look as pretty, but usually people can throw something together and it's good. He would go somewhere when he's eating, you get the sense that he's not just eating a piece of chicken.
Hmm.
He's taking in like where he was at before this. The history of the dish and like all of the different stuff that comes with it. And I
Hmm.
think that's the difference between food that's truly good and actually stands out and when you start getting into pretentious. Because pretentious, I feel, is when you try to create something in a way that isn't authentic, trying to overcomplicate things, using too many spices, getting way too fancy with it. It's like, well, who are you? I actually wasn't too bad in art class. There were artists that their drawings weren't exactly, I'll just say they weren't Monet, like
Yeah.
I wasn't either, but I was better, quote
Hmm.
unquote. But the deal is that they could draw stick figures, and as long as they poured their heart and soul into those stick figures, that meant more to somebody. That meant more than somebody that made this elaborate painting that they don't even care about.
Right.
I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
I mean, and again, I think that is, I mean, the man was humble. The man was humble as fuck. You wouldn't like imagine that that's a trait that somebody would give to him because of because of the personality that he had, on his shows and everything. But he was humble in the fact that, I mean, he was quoted in that movie. They played a clip of him saying, here I was, this restaurant chef that I wasn't really that great at, and then I turned into a writer, which I was okay, and now I'm a traveler. Like, I mean, it like I think that humbling himself to his experiences, I think that came from I think that came directly from him humbling himself before the things that he did to make other people's lives better. And I mean, with chefs, most of the time that's trying to do that with food, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, when you come up with a new dish, like when you're at home experimenting, what is the drive that you have for that?
Yeah, it is this. it's more than just. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend there's not nights where I come home and I just throw something together because I want to shove something in my face, you know.
Right.
But for example, um, I make a filet Oscar for me and my wife for our anniversary because that was
Mhm.
the first thing that I ever made her when she came over. I was like, I want to do something really good
Mhm.
before we ever started really being serious. First time she visited, so making the act of making the filet Oscar means so much more than if I were to just, oh, I found this recipe for filet Oscar and I'm just making it.
Mhm.
You know, there's nostalgia and there's memories tied to it. There's the effort placed in making sure all of the seasonings are correct and the flavors are right and the textures are there. The sauce isn't broken or over salted. The steak is cooked correctly. And all of that stuff, there's, the particulars of it, but there's the emotions that are tied to that.
Right.
So whenever you're making something, it's kind of like the difference between an artist like Michelangelo and his paintings. I'm not comparing myself to Michelangelo, and no, not at all. I'm just the difference between somebody like Michelangelo versus somebody like Andy Warhol, where Andy Warhol, his message was to kind of expose the over commercialization of art. So
Mhm.
he intentionally made his art worthless as an expression of that. Like
Mhm.
that was the expression. And a lot of people didn't get it. And they were like, oh, he was just a sellout. It's like, well, you didn't understand what he was doing.
Right.
So Anthony Bourdain, like his travels, his, seeking happiness. I remember at one point he was reflecting on whether it's worse to be alone in a bad place or to be in a good place with nobody to share it with.
Right.
And that's like that right there kind of sums up like what I get from the movie and from him himself.
I think that, I mean, and now we're kind of moving into a bit of a darker phase of this movie, Bourdain the Bitter. I think he really struggled with being able to rectify his celebrity life with his family life, with his you know, I mean, like you said, with the imposter syndrome and everything, like being genuine, and also being able to keep that balance, which there wasn't any. He was gone 250 days out of the year, and he had a daughter that was nowhere near him for more than 2/3 of the year, and I think he really struggled with that.
I can only imagine what it's like for somebody that is literally spending 2/3 of the year in a different country, basically having a long distance relationship with the person that fulfills them.
I don't know if you remember when he was in his backyard and he was grilling. He had hot dogs. He had
When he was talking about
kielbasa, and
dad,
yeah, like he was talking about TV dads, and how that's how he feels normal. And it's like, wait a second. So an average Joe running a restaurant who becomes a writer, then becomes a traveling celebrity chef, probably the most normal average Joe guy that's done that, has to go home and pretend to be a television dad to feel normal. What kind of a place does that put a person? Like mental health wise? Think about that. I have to go and pretend to be a television dad to feel like a normal person. To me, that's just incredible.
where I think that was a lot of when I said that he was still 25 years old in a 40 or 50-year-old body. There's a lot of millennials that are going through this.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, I'll be on TikTok and there will be somebody being like, when I was a kid, I thought people in their 30s had their shit together. And he's
Yeah.
like, and they're like, I still feel like I don't know what's going on. I don't think I should feel that way, And I think he was the same way, but almost on a more level because, he went from being this crazy rebellious person to now he has a family and he's got a good career. His rent's paid. He made that comment. My rent's paid. That meant so much at the time. But one of the things that I noticed, and he fell victim to this too, is no matter where you're at, because I can't relate to him as far as being like a world famous chef, like a household name. Like I can say Anthony Bourdain to a random person, and even if they don't know a lot about him, they've heard of it.
Right.
But one of the things that I relate to similar to that is this whole concept of being not really knowing the direction your life is going, and then you end up in one place where you end up in a place where you don't have a lot of money, you don't really have a lot of stuff going on, and you kind of feel like your life has kind of reached the end of its course at that point,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, like I can barely pay rent, I got to pick between the electric bill, that kind of crap. And going from there, when you get the new car and you don't even have to look at your bank account to know that your rent's paid, that level, not rich but comfortable, right? Even that only lasts so long. It could even be a Lamborghini. I don't
Mm-hmm.
have a Lamborghini, but get a
Right.
Lamborghini. It'll last about a month, about 2 weeks to a month. New car smell starts to wear off. Kind of realize it's got its own issues with driving at places, extra security. There's like all of this stuff that happens. So the Lamborghini's great for a while. Then other people, oh my God, Lamborghini. I'm like, yeah, cool.
Yeah.
That's what I can only say that's what I've heard other people say when and a lot of it's because the material.
Well, I mean, we all do that. It's just on a smaller scale. It's not. It doesn't
Yeah,
have to be a
that's what I
Lamborghini.
was getting at.
Like, I mean, right here. Do you know how long I wanted an SM7B microphone? The Cadillac of studio microphones. I wanted one of these so bad I couldn't stop talking about it. You heard me talking about it forever.
Life goal.
And how just this thing just radiates majesty with how amazing the sound is that comes off of it and everything like that. And then I got one and I don't ever think about it anymore. But I know that there are people out there that are looking at that microphone, like if I put out, the video on this or something, they'll look at that microphone, and I know that there's somebody out there that's going to think that son of a bitch has a Shure SM7B. And the reason I know that is because I did that. I'd see somebody with one and I'd be like, motherfucker, like,
Well,
so
okay.
it doesn't have to be a Lamborghini, but we've all been there. Like,
I
we
mean, my
want something
example,
and then it just kind of goes away.
right? My example of that is I always wanted a really nice set of Zwilling knives, not Henkel's. Well, it is Henkel's, but J.A. Zwilling, Henkel's, made in Germany, hand forged, all of that. It was almost $400 for a set of 6 knives, and I
Mhm.
finally got it. And same thing. Actually, in my knife bag right now, I replaced one of the knives with a Henkel's International brand. Instead of the $200 knife, I have a $50 knife in my bag because I like it better.
Right.
It feels better in my hand and whatever. And it's a personal preference, but that's what I mean though. Is like I waited so long and wanted to get to a place where I had this nice set of knives, and now I'm just kind of like, well, they're knives. It's great. They work well. But then they get scuffed up, and then you have to resharpen them, and they're all maybe one falls and it gets chipped or whatever, and it's not the same. It's not what you think it's gonna be.
So what you're telling me is that if I go and I buy myself a set of Vushtoff kitchen knives, I will have them in my kitchen and I will just use them the same amount as I would any other kitchen knife.
Yep.
And eventually I'll just be like, I might as well have just bought, something. I'm not going to buy mainstays, but
But well, I know what
but
you mean.
something similar.
But what's interesting about it is things that if that was a set, if that was something that was maybe given to me by my mom or
Mm-hmm.
a grandpa or an uncle, whatever, you know what I mean, a friend, whatever. If it was a gift, they would mean a lot more to me for a lot longer period, not because it was like this goal that I wanted and I achieved the goal, but because it was like there's now sentimental value kind of attached to it.
Right.
You know, like I've got a microphone I'm not even using right now because I don't have the stuff that I need to make it work correctly. But that was a gift from Heather. That's going to mean like I'm not ever getting rid of it, even if I get a $700 Rode or whatever later
Mm-hmm.
on. That microphone I want to keep,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the value that's attached to it. And I think not to be too far off topic, so to tie it back to the movie, it seemed like whenever he had good experiences, it was always shared experiences with other people. It was never things that he personally did.
Mm-hmm.
He got on the bestseller list, and he was just like, after getting on the bestseller list, there's that all of that wears off, and he's just kind of like, okay, now what? Like I did that,
What's the next one to do?
been there, done that, got the jacket.
Well, and they kind of did that for him. I mean, uh, well, here's your bestseller. Here's the title of your next one. Like, that was contracted for him. He was contracted into making another book. After Kitchen Confidential, what was it? It was, I don't remember what it was. All of those things, like, and it's still like, and that's what I mean about it. Like, I mean, I think that I think that all of that stuff was a part of him anyway, because it seemed like it from the beginning, as he went through his life and had all of these experiences, the things that did stay with him, the things that he would talk about, that he remembered and things like that, were more about the people that he was having these experiences with. I mean, whether it was the people that were around him, for the production, or it was the people that he was interacting with from those places. I don't want to label someone's life in a place that I've never been, on a person that I've never met. I don't want to label something like that, like all encompassing horrible. But he saw a lot of people in a lot of really horrible places throughout his career. And that kind of brings me to the deep dark part of all of this is that, I mean, he there is no way that man didn't suffer from some extreme depression. I mean, do you remember when he was in I think it was in Haiti that he was at, and he stopped and he had some food, and they had paid for just a bunch of food, and after his crew was done eating, they had a bunch of leftover food, and he said, just go ahead and give it to the people that are here to get food. And then kids were fighting over it.
Right.
Like, what did I just do? Like,
he realized it wasn't just food, that there was a survivability thing happening. There's,
mm-hmm.
It's on a different level than just, oh, here's the benefit of having a free meal. It was like, that's going to keep them alive, literally.
Right. I mean, it wasn't just, it was life and death. And I mean, and like, I mean, you could see it, some of the kids that were in those lines and getting ready to push each other around. Like, you could see
that one kid
in
was
their
walking around
eyes.
with a belt slapping people.
Yeah. Like slapping people with a belt. I mean, and there is no way, that being in a place like that and seeing something like that, I mean, that's seeing something like that is trauma. And I mean, and I, at the risk of sounding like this is diminishing what those people are going through, one of the best ways that I'd ever heard it was Kevin Smith. Kevin Smith did a video a couple years back where he was talking about trauma. And he had said that, trauma is sometimes taken from one place. Like, people like to try to use their trauma as a competition. Like, like, yeah, I'm dealing with some trauma from something that happened to me, but it's not near as bad as this person's trauma over here, who went through all of these horrible things. But the brain doesn't work that way. The brain doesn't say this is a lesser trauma.
Right, because like as bad as my life was, or Anthony Bourdain's life was, like there's soldiers that come over that have unspeakable horrors that they've witnessed, that they've gone through, all of that, 100,000 times worse than anything I could ever live through.
Right.
Know?
But that's not how the brain registers that. The brain doesn't say, oh, well, you have trauma, it's just not as bad. Like the brain goes, you had something horrible happen to you. Right. And Kevin Smith, actually, he called it Trauma Olympics, where people would sit down and compare each other's trauma to see who had it worse or whatever.
I've seen a version of that with being poor, having a pour off. Who was more poor than somebody else. Yeah.
Right. So I mean, these people that he was seeing they were suffering trauma, and he was being traumatized by being there. And while his experience wasn't near what the experience they were having is,
right, because they got every day.
The effect on the brain is the same. So he wasn't living that, but he was still getting the same psychological effect of it just by being there and seeing it.
Yeah, I mean, it creates a existential crisis.
Yeah.
Like,
and so I think that because of, I think that like, especially in the later years when he did start getting a little bit more political, and going into like the Congo and some of those really dangerous places, I think that because of doing a lot of that sort of travel, I think that a lot of that trauma really added up for him.
Like sandbags all piling on over time.
Yeah.
If he said that he felt like he couldn't talk to anybody about it, and people are like, well, there was people everywhere, why can't you talk? But when you part of the problem is that when you experience this type of trauma where it's not literally starving to death or your arm didn't literally get blown off, you don't feel like you have the right or deserve, and this is also a personal experience, you don't feel like you have the right or deserve to talk about it because other people have it worse. So, what the hell are you doing so sad about this? Oh, your wife left you? Oh, boo-hoo.
Right. And that's where that Trauma Olympics thing that I was telling you about came from. The brain doesn't differentiate those experiences. It just says something bad happened. You had bad shit happen. And now we're going to put this flag in this place in your brain so that every time you get anywhere close to revisiting this area, it's going to come back for you.
Right.
And it's going to affect you. And when, I mean, I don't even remember how much they said, 600 and some thousand miles of travel.
Yeah, I remember them saying they equivalent to going around the Earth like 26 times or something.
Yeah,
like that.
Yeah, 26 times around the planet is how much he traveled. And I mean, when you've traveled that much, where the fuck are you going to go where you're not going to have some kind of trauma tied to anything? You know, like, I mean, that shit is going to be in your face all the time. And, and especially with his age being where he was age wise, I mean, he came from a generation that didn't believe in better mental health.
Right. Their mental health was don't be a pussy.
Right. That is exactly it. And that or what is the I always call it the bootstraps generation. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, or whatever. And it's like, I mean, luckily there are some people in that generation that kind of that had enlightened themselves about that kind of stuff and everything, but largely no. And because of that, I think that he left he left a lot of traumatic experiences go unrectified.
Yeah.
I don't think he worked through any of that,
Well,
and that's going to cause some depression.
yeah, I mean, it also makes sense why he kind of that there was kind of that section of the movie of Roadrunner where he became agoraphobic, maybe not necessarily in a literal sense, but
Hmm.
the only place where he could get away from it would be to go to the sand dunes, where there isn't anything.
Right.
Go like he's traveling, but he's traveling to places where there isn't anybody, and he could just be alone and just kind of look at the vastness of wherever he was at. So
Right.
yeah, I think you're onto something with that.
Unfortunately, some of the best healing requires other people. I mean, I'm not diminishing the benefits that people can have from time to self reflect, and just be with themselves. Like, I mean, you have to be comfortable to be with yourself.
Yeah,
But but in order to really have any true healing, you're going to need help from somebody. I mean, ultimately, you're the one that does the work, but it's going to require some influence.
yeah. Not only that, but like being. I can't relate obviously to any kind of being famous or anything, just based off of what I've seen. The act of being famous and how tabloids, they suspect that the tabloids played a role in it was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back kind of thing. Like
Oh yeah,
he had all of this internal depression and stuff going on, and then on top of that, tabloids find that his wife was cheating on him. On top of it, and because it happened not to the him opting out happened not too long after that came out,
hmm,
and it was kind of like the last bastion of like, well, what else is there then? Like, what am I doing this for? Screw it.
right,
You know?
yeah. And I mean, we always, as humans, we always look for a greater meaning. I mean, and it's kind of unfortunate that it's so hard for people to grasp that things simply are.
Yeah.
But and I don't think that he was really out of touch with that. But I think that you can kind of see that the depression, when it had its opportunity, really moved in on him. So it wasn't that he had lost touch. He had just changed perspective, and not in a positive way.
Yeah.
And I think that really that made his, I think that made the last leg of his life very difficult. And I don't know, like the
Yeah.
man was so insightful and everything, that it's so hard to imagine that somebody who could write things that people feel in their soul and put them into words that they don't even know that they feel until they hear the words and go, I know how that feels.
Right.
Somebody that is so self-reflective could let their mental health slide so much, and not recognize it. It's astounding, and it's also very sad.
Yeah, it's a hell of a thing, and it's almost like a way that you can describe it is when it comes to stuff like that, like ideation and depression and stuff, just in general, it's not like you get rid of the depression and then it goes away and it's gone. It's more like you got it out of the room and closed the door, but it's always just behind the door. And it only takes a little bit for that door to open back up and for it to come back because it's just for clinical depression. Like, people get depressed all the time over other things. It's temporary and whatever. But for, like, the clinical stuff, it's always kind of this undercurrent of this thing that you have to always not really avoid, but it's kind of an opportunist kind of thing. And all it takes is enough crap to happen for people to just check out, And it's sad. It really is.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. It's I don't know. The I guess, I mean, and something that I think that was really important that kind of came from that kind of came from all of this is that I noticed a change, like, because of my experiences in a kitchen with you. I was a part of a lot of and still am a lot of like Facebook groups for chefs and line cooks and things like that. And I remember when this happened, because the effect that it had on the culinary and hospitality world was just, it was huge. And it wasn't for the things that it wasn't for the things that everybody would assume. It wasn't because of you I decided to become a chef. Because of you I decided to travel, or any of that stuff. The things that people were saying was, this is something that is a struggle in our industry, and
right.
and it's being ignored. I mean, can you kind of speak to that? Like, I mean, what's your experience with a lack of acknowledgement to better mental health in the kitchen industry?
Well, yeah, that's one of the big things, man, because burnout and depression are some of the biggest parts of that, and substance abuse kind of stems, it's a symptom of this overarching thing. And I think nowadays it's coming to light a lot more. I see a lot less posts of people trying to, like, gatekeep how badass they are because they work a 65 or 70-hour work week.
Do you think that has anything to do with Anthony Bourdain?
I think that it was definitely a part of it. I think that it was really eye-opening because they were like, if it was kind of one of those things where, like, well, if it can reach him, it can reach anybody.
Right.
And I think it caused a lot of people to start talking about it, like, similar to the Me Too stuff that it talked about in Roadrunner. I won't get into that as much because it's more political.
Right.
But the concept of, like, people dealing with depression and taking it seriously, because a lot of the boomer cooks for a long time were like the suck it up buttercup, like, you got more important crap to worry about, and mental health was kind of like, well, if you can't take it, then that's tough shit. So even my approach, one of the things that I always talk about when, like, one of my videos I did, I said, I answered the question, can anybody be a chef? And I straight up said no. And I got pushback from that. People just, they were like, well, anybody can pick up a spatula. And it's like, yes, anybody can cook food, but clinical depression, anxiety, medical issues, there's a lot of reasons why someone may not be able to handle it. And it doesn't make them a weaker person. But putting mental health first is always, like, in my book, is always the most important. Like, I would rather somebody quit being a chef or even a line cook and be happy flipping burgers at McDonald's or being a janitor. So, like, if that's what makes them happy, then that's what my opinion is. That I think that's what they should go for, not literally killing yourself on the inside because you want to be the next, Gordon Ramsay or whatever. Because,
right.
like, you're going to end up eating yourself alive.
Yeah, and I don't know. I feel that that's very That's also something that's really important to look at for people. I mean, in any profession, really, but
Yeah.
but with this movie in mind, people in the hospitality arena, if you struggle from a condition like anxiety, working in a kitchen is not going to be good for
Right.
you.
Low
You
stress.
know, if you struggle with substance use, I mean, there are restaurants that you walk into and the whole city knows that every last goddamn one of them in the kitchen is high as fuck right now.
Right.
Like, you know, there's that's just something that's a part of kitchen life, apparently. And if you struggle with addiction and you need to get out of it, then you need to consider, you know, maybe a career change. And, I mean, and if you need to make yourself better, and you know, need to go find a doctor's office or something like that to talk to somebody, kitchen life probably isn't going to be good for you, because you are not going to have any times off that office is open. You're going to be working that whole time. So, I mean, I get where you're coming from with the whole, you know, no, not everybody can be a chef. Gusteau was right. Everybody can cook. Anybody can cook, but not everybody can be a chef.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Yeah. So
It was actually interesting. One of the other things that I noticed in the Facebook groups around Anthony Bourdain opting out was there were a lot of people that would post a quote from him or put a picture up of him or anything related to him at all.
mm-hmm.
And you would get really vitriolic comments, really nasty, like, why do you want to work? Why are you going to worship somebody that did that? You know, the guy was a wuss, and like this really nasty stuff. And part of it, I know that some people just like to be nasty, but some of it is also distancing because they actually feel the same way as him. And them insulting him and, you know, saying those nasty things are a way of them putting distance between themselves and what he did because they've thought about it before. They,
Right.
you know, and they use that as a tool of like, well, if I act this way, I don't have to think about it. And so there's still a lot of pain out there and a lot of people that haven't come to terms with it yet. And I think in general, in the line cook industry, in the industry of being a cook, a chef, and even outside of that, like I think it needs to be like therapy and mental health. I think needs to be more normalized than it already is. For
Right.
sure.
When I started the concept of this podcast, I never thought that it never entered my mind that I would have a documentary on it. I mean, I should have known better. But no, I'm really honored that that this was a part of my podcast with you suggesting. I don't know that I'd watched this before, and I see a lot of value in it, mental health wise. I mean, it's really amazing. Something that might be some helpful information. I don't know if you knew this or not, but there is a new number to contact for anybody who's looking to 86 themselves from Life's Menu. It's the crisis lifeline is it's now just like 911, only it's 988.
Oh, that's awesome.
So it's now short form. You don't have some big long 800 number to remember or try to call around or anything. So make sure everybody starts knowing. I mean, everybody knows 911, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I think everybody can learn 988 pretty easy. But also, that's also available through text as well.
Oh, okay.
So people who aren't comfortable talking with somebody can also use text message for that. Tell me where people can find you, Chef of 86th.
Yeah, I'm on TikTok and on YouTube at x86, and that's my handle. I just recently got done doing a video on menu design. I'm going to try and do more live streams. This is kind of a crossover episode, but kind of an example of what I would like to eventually do on my channel pretty regularly. So yeah, the whole concept is about learning leadership skills, soft skills for cooks. So everything outside of recipes, because like recipe channels are a dime a dozen.
Oh
They're
yeah.
every, and I'm not going to do it better than Andrew Weissman already does it, or Gordon
Well,
Ramsay.
I don't know. You can do a lot of that kind of stuff way better than a lot of websites, because if you can make me a series of recipes where I don't have to be told about the winter of 76 and the quality time you spent with your family before coming up with this recipe, then I'm a happy guy. So, I mean, you always have that in your back pocket. You can make recipes that don't have life stories with them.
Yeah, for sure. I
All
can accept
right.
that.
If you got a suggestion or want to be on the show, send an email to contact@movie-rx.com. And I hope to see you at your next checkup.